I cannot count. This was number 15 in the previous video, but it doesn't really matter because this should have appeared a lot earlier anyway, considering that the music on here is the Minecraft soundtrack by C418. It is a fantastic collection of soft ambient tracks, which means that even though nostalgia plays a pretty big role in my appreciation for this music, I think that you don't have to like video game soundtracks or have played Minecraft or really like soundtracks period, because it doesn't sound entirely like a soundtrack. It's not as incidental, it's not filmic, it's not giving you the sense that there's an anticipation. These are just songs that accompany whatever's going on in the game. So in that sense, it doesn't feel targeted, or it doesn't feel like there's a directive, which I find is usually the feeling in video game soundtracks. You know, they have to maintain a kind of urgency, so oftentimes I find that they lean a little bit too much into tropes that belong to the silver screen, instead of creating something that is more unique to what a video game experience is like. And I think this was probably one of the first soundtracks to do that. Shout out Persona. But yeah, really, really great stuff. It's so relaxing. And there's, you know, soundtrack material in the sense that there are sound effects from time to time, but I think it's very listenable otherwise. I would recommend it to anyone. C148. C418. I always get those numbers mixed up. By C418. C418. And can we appreciate that translucent green pressing, which fits so nicely the cover. I love when, you know, the design of the record is in dialogue with the game. I love that they're playing with the square format of the album itself. David Bowie, Hunky, Dory. Now, as David Bowie had just passed away in 2016, I sort of went back through his discography to see, you know, what his earlier material was made of. And this one's really interesting because he's definitely still coming into his own. It has classics such as Changes and Oh You Pretty Things. And it's really interesting how he's in dialogue with his contemporaries by referencing, you know, Bob Dylan and Andy Warhol. It's not my favorite Bowie record, but I still appreciate it quite a bit. It's, you know, one of the few rock albums of this style and era that I can actually stand in the first place. I think it's psychedelic without being overbearing, and I do appreciate it. Weird sort of, I don't know, dull gold color on the record there. They call it gold, but I don't know about that. Kendrick Lamar, Section 80. Similar to Bowie in the sense that, not that he died, but I was sort of going through his back catalog after a certain release, which was To Pimp a Butterfly. That album is absolutely my favorite of his, and I certainly enjoy this earlier style, where compared to Mr. Marauders, Mr. Moneybags, I don't even know what the last one's called. I like him up until Damn. I thought the latest one was a little too indulgent. He always takes it a step too far, but that's always been his hamartia, is he doesn't know, I think, when to hold back just a little bit to be a little more subtle, a little more poignant maybe. I think the last record, a little too on the nose on some parts. But Section 80 is awesome. I love the sampling on this. He is coming up with rap schemes that are complex yet entertaining and effortless. I don't think this is a real pressing because it's transparent, and there's a lot of bootlegs that are this strange sort of transparent color. It might be a real pressing, I don't know. But Section 80 is a great, great album. Death Grips. Fashion Leaks. The Last Tapes. What is this? It is an album of internet B-sides and rarities that I think is mostly composed of instrumentals from the album that was between Government Plates and Jenny Death, which of course is not a real album per se because Ride does not appear on any of the songs. It is purely instrumental, and essentially those songs were meant as a kind of placeholder for the fans in between albums, because everyone online was clamoring for new music from Death Grips. I mean, the climate on 4chan, Reddit, everyone was typing out Jenny, Death, when. They had broken up, they had not showed up to shows. I mean, they have a really interesting relationship with their fans, and so the instrumentals on that fashion show album are actually named in such a way where from top to bottom they spell out Jenny, Death, when. And I mean, I really appreciate having this, even if it's a bootleg, even if it's just instrumentals and weird tracks, because it's hard to find Death Grip stuff to begin with. I mean, when I saw this in the wild in a secondhand store, I was like, what? I know their discography. This does not exist. And for someone to have gone to the effort of compiling it, designing and renaming and pressing all of this, I just think is an interesting bit of history in and of itself. There's something really attractive about an unofficial vinyl pressing of something. It's precisely that kind of mockery of their fans that I think makes them such a compelling band, because even though they antagonize them, it's like their fans just can't get enough. Similar to, or should I say related to, insofar as they share the same corner of the internet, is Kero Bonito's TOTEP EP. And it's called TOTEP EP after that first track there. This is a great little 10-inch. You may notice it's slightly smaller than the 12-inch, and so it only has 4 tracks on it. But I got this lovely silver pressing with a photographic label. I don't think it's going to focus there, but it really, really is a great EP because, you know, when I say that it's related to Death Grips, they got a lot of comparisons when they dropped this, because the single, which is Only Acting, came out before the tracks, and it essentially changed their production style, because before this they were doing really clean, poppy, Japanese pop-infused stuff, where sort of the happiness and the carefree nature of Kero Bonito's lyrics was reflected in the way that it was produced. But Only Acting has this, you know, structure where for the first half of the song it's sort of a regular pop-punk track, and then it starts to break down and decompose, and it samples itself and becomes really noisy towards the end. So when Kero Bonito dropped this, they got a lot of comparisons also because they share sort of a similar fan base insofar as Anthony Fantano has given positive reviews to both bands. And really I think part of it has to do with the fact that they're structured as bands in a sort of similar way, where they have like 2 white guys being producers behind the scenes, and you have a front man that is of a different race than the other 2 white guys. But I think part of the joke in comparing the two for a long time was that Kero Bonito was some of the happiest music you could find, and Death Grips was some of the angriest, saddest music you could find. So I think with this, they sort of broke expectations and invited even more comparisons, because with becoming noisier and more aggressive, they actually increased their similarities to Death Grips. And while Only Acting is the most abrasive song on here, like, none of the other songs really remind you of Death Grips, and even looking back on it, the comparison is beyond silly to begin with. But You Know How It Is a fantastic little song. It is so, so good. It has a great guitar solo, and it's so short, so sweet, super underrated track. If you listen to any song off of TOTEP EP, definitely listen to You Know How It Is. Such a great song. The Unmentionable with Kid Cudi. I'll say his name, Kanye West. Yeah, I've been around for a lot of Kanye's releases post-graduation. And I sort of say post-graduation because that's when I really became aware of his music, even though graduation for me, I started appreciating it around the time that I myself graduated from high school. So really, chronologically, would come actually later than this, a little bit. But Kids See Ghosts was maybe the first release of his that I was around for and also loved. I mean, Kids See Ghosts I can't get away from it, despite my better judgment, despite the fact that this music, Kanye's music, is a little bit ruined by his personality outside of the music. Despite that, I do believe it's a little bit easy, in this case maybe, to separate the art from the artist, and it is so well made. I mean, the song structures are complex, but the tracks themselves aren't super long, and it's really well produced so that it has multiple phases that all flow really organically from one to another. And even though it's only half an hour, it feels like it's an album double its length, because with the songs that are as well produced, I mean, every single song on here is absolutely fire. This is super tight, and he released it in the summer where he was making all these half an hour long albums, but this is definitely the best one to come out of that era of Kanye's involvement. They weren't really his albums. He was involved in the production of a lot of other people's albums, but this is, as a collaboration, really, really great stuff. I mean, I don't love Cudi's singing on like very, very momentary parts, because I think Cudi's just not that good of a singer. This is my critique with his music always has been that he's simply just not a good singer. But I don't know what Kanye put him through to make this, because his singing is probably the best it's ever been on this album, and I don't think we're gonna get a version of Cudi like this again, because I don't see him with the same, you know, energy and drive. I mean, this is really, really just such great music. I love the way that it feels like music that I'd heard before. When I heard it, it felt immediately recognizable. And I can't say that for a lot of albums. It just flows so organically for some unspecified reason. I mean, it really has no right to work as well as it does, but it does. The sampling is, you know, reminds you a little bit of old school Kanye, but then at once it's so futuristic and so forward thinking that the songs are like kind of nothing I've ever heard and super familiar at the same time. It's really, really great record. Are you guys tired of the Death Grips yet? Here's another Death Grips album, Year of the Snitch, which was their last release. They haven't released anything since this. And I didn't love it when it first came out, because I was kind of anticipating a follow-up to the one before that, Bottomless Pit. And that's pretty cool. It's got sort of a cutout on the front so that you can change the album art as you see fit. I have it on the inverse because personally I find these mouths to be terrifying, but ooh, I think another translucent green. Yeah, 2 for 2 on this one. It's not a common pressing, translucent green. But anyway, back to the quality of the music on this. I, in retrospect, love this album. It is so strange the way that it's produced. Ride, who is usually, you know, as a frontman, in the mix, in the front, this time he's sort of almost behind the instruments and quiet at certain points. I think the mixing on here is super weird. I can't, like, imagine what went into the conception of what this album would sound like. It's so rickety and unstable. I don't know at any moment what direction it's going to go in sonically, and that even sort of is reflected in some of the collaborators. One of the reasons I love this album is because they collaborated with Lucas Abela, aka Justice Yelled Him, aka the grandpa who plays glass noise pressing planes of glass against his face. If you don't know about him, Lucas Abela, Justice Yelled Him, is, I believe, an Australian noise music artist who hooks up contact mics to panes. I think earlier I said planes. Panes of glass, and then grabs these panes of glass, presses them against his face, and blows air bubbles and puts them on his mouth and makes vibrations that they get picked up with the contact mics and ran through a bunch of filters and pedals. I don't know exactly what his process is. I'm dying to see him perform live. And what's so interesting, and I'm sure what attracted Death Grips to Lucas, was that he cuts himself, quite frankly, in a lot of his performances. A lot of the times it's by accident, and he says, you know, I don't do this on purpose. It's simply part of the performance that I put on, and I never plan to get cut, essentially. But it happens because these are raw planes of glass. And I think he's even spoken about finding these on the street. He takes them home, cleans them, and they each have their own sonic properties. But his music, if you look it up, it sounds like the screams of 1,000 agonized souls. I mean, it truly is like kind of the, you know, the kind of noise music that needs to be experienced in its live form to be truly appreciated, maybe. And on that note, I actually have a cassette which has a unique live recording of his, which I bought off his Bandcamp a while ago. Anyway, Death Grips incorporates some of that noise into the mix on a couple of these tracks, and it's just really interesting. They have a couple other collaborators on here that were super strange, like the director of the Shrek movie, but anyway, super bizarre record. I don't think any album is ever going to sound like that. Maybe even because Death Grips, are they broken up? They haven't dropped music in forever, so I don't know. Jenny Death When, next album When, I saw them for the first time, actually, at Primavera Sound last year in Barcelona, Spain. And I sustained an injury from being in the mosh pit for 45 minutes. An injury that I did not recover from for a full year afterward. I had one of my tendons in my legs was inflamed. But point being that the mosh pit to the Death Grip show, I had been waiting years and years to see, was a worthwhile sacrifice. All the pain and suffering that caused afterward, because they were such a fantastic performance. They performed in front of just a red screen, and a lot of these songs I've just been waiting so long to hear in person. They perform amazingly. Zach Hill is maybe the best drummer in the world, in my opinion. Controversial take, I know. But I think Andy Morin, does tremendous production work. I think his use of synthesizers is so unusual. I don't think I've heard textures ever in any other music quite like Death Grips. And it's one of the reasons they're such a unique and cherished band, because no one makes music like them, truly. Nothing as tortured as a Death Grips album. Kero Bonito, Time and Place. This was the follow-up to the Tote EP that they dropped, where Only Acting was, and I believe that's just sort of a carryover standout single from that EP that got placed here. But this is a great, great final album, similar to Death Grips insofar as they haven't dropped anything since. And who knows if they will. They have dropped a couple tracks here and there, but who knows? I would love to hear from them again, because this was a really solid release, and since they sort of telegraphed their change in direction with Tote EP, they continued down that indie rock alternative route, and this is just a great indie rock record. Like, I think it's so funny hearing this album compared to something like Bonito Generation that sounds so different, but still has a sort of signature Kero Bonito happiness and a vibe, because for one, Sarah Bonito's voice is so uplifting. She sounds kind of childish, but in a really endearing and soft-spoken way. I also think, the twee moment sometimes is surprisingly good. I wouldn't usually listen to a song in that style, but they really make it work. And it also flows super nicely as a record because of the way they've just organized the track listing. I think it makes for a great vinyl listening experience in particular. And it comes with a booklet, which is unusual for records. I love that it's a lyric sheet and it has this like Xeroxed quality to it, with sort of the crappy reproduction. I just really like it because on this album art, which you can see better than on the digital version, you realize that this is just like a photocopy of a lot of smaller objects, which I had never realized until I saw the album art. And of course, seeing the album art bigger is one of the reasons to have records. And I really would recommend this to anyone who maybe tried out Kero Bonito's earlier stuff and wasn't super charmed by it, because I think it can sound almost too childish for some people, and this is a little more mature in the sense that it's like rock music. I think you have to be just as mature to make Bonito Generation as you do to make this, but in terms of sound, it is like more for grown-ups in the sense that it has abrasive guitar and more of a hard rock vibe. There's a strange pattern going on here with this album where the last 3 records have been sort of the last that we've heard of each respective artist in a major album sense. I'm not counting the 9-hour dump, which I've already complained about in previous videos, because it's just that, a dump of everything that he's worked on since doing this album. Mac DeMarco, Here Comes the Cowboy. Not a great record, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think about half the songs are good, which is, I think, an F by school percentage points. But there's some songs here that I would actively skip, like Choo Choo, and I think even Here Comes the Cowboy is a little too repetitive. There's just songs on here that are not that good, not that thought out. He's usually a really competent songwriter, but some of these feel like demos that aren't even that good to begin with. And also, for a 3rd time on this list, a translucent green record. A lot of strange consistency there. I really do love songs like Preoccupied and Nobody and Finally Alone. So again, about half the songs are good. But when you buy an album on vinyl, you really want all of them to be good. And I actually pre-ordered this because I had so much trust that he would, come up with something good. But unfortunately, I think it's hard to top this old dog. I think he used all of his remaining songwriting juice on that one. And it's going to take him a while to recover, I think, from what I've heard in interviews and things of that nature. I think he definitely needs to take it easy. Oh my god, did I just rip it? We got a little fold out inside of the Mac DeMarco album. I love stuff like this. Now, I knew about Carly Rae Jepsen, as many did, for a while, because of the Call Me Maybe song. And for a while, I thought she was a one-hit wonder, until I actually saw her in concert at a different Primavera Sound in Barcelona, 2019. And, I went into the crowd, like, not even expecting, oh, it's just a black record. I went into, her concert not expecting anything, but it turned out that she is an amazing performer, and right off the bat, I liked a lot of her songs. I was sort of interested in music that was unabashedly happy or poppy at the time, which is why sort of my interest in Kero Bonito. Not that they're similar, but there is a certain joy and pop freedom. I don't think that they're constrained by like how commercial they sound. It's almost hyper commercial music. I mean, this sounds super like 80s to me and 80s tinged. Some of the songs, have synths on them that could totally be out of that era of pop music, which I think a lot of, I'm thinking of Taylor Swift's 1989, I think a lot of contemporary pop music does take cues from that era, but Carly Rae Jepsen is probably the best to do it. After that concert, which, by the way, was just me and a crowd of bears, it was hilarious. I was not aware that she had such a massively gay fan base until I went to that concert. I really liked it. It's such a great record all the way through, and there's such a poignancy to her songwriting, in the sense that she's always speaking about this lost love so passionately. And going from sort of all potential stages, she's a little boy crazy, but that boy craziness brings her issues, like on Boy Problems, but it's cute. It makes me feel like a high school girl, and I kind of wish I had heard in high school. I was late to the Carly Rae Jepsen train, and I regret it. This is a great album. It'll, I think, surprise you. Her songwriting is deceptively simple, but really powerful, I think. There's, her voice, I think she sells it. She's a great pop performer. I just really like how glitzy and smooth her music is. And it's so unabashedly high school in some sense. Like, I really like you. It's so simple in its message, but that simplicity is part of its power. And I haven't really heard Carly Rae Jepsen's music since. Like, this for me is sort of the only album that I know her by. But God, it's a great one. I think she really redeemed herself, you know, and proved that she was not a one-hit wonder with that album. Summer 2019. I was obsessed with this one Johnny Cash record, At Folsom Prison. And I don't know why I was. It just was the summer of Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison. And this is a really interesting pressing because it's sort of a complete documentation. Oh my God, I was talking about pamphlets earlier with Kero Bonito. I'd forgotten this beautiful booklet was in here. It's a documentation of his actual process of recording it at the prison. At Folsom Prison is not just the title, but truly a live record, and it's so, so powerful to hear the inmates cheer along with his antics. He had such a bad boy persona that they're feeding into, and you can hear that sort of aggression and male presence, that testosterone in the air that I'm sure was really through the fact that, you know, contrary to a lot of versions of this album, they cut out a lot of the recording, you know, because there's chatting between songs and introductions and things of that sort. So in this special edition, they kept all that in. And while it's interesting from like a historical perspective, you know, and I do certainly think it should exist in this limited edition, it's a little bit difficult to listen to because I really like the songs by themselves, and sometimes they have people talking too much, and I sort of lose the energy. I don't like skits or interludes generally in my music, but, you know, there's songs I think that got cut even off of the cleaned up version that is sort of the most widely distributed. But anyway, I really think this is probably the best country music album. Not that I'm particularly well versed in country. In fact, I would say this is the only album within that genre that I listen to. The rest are sort of, I think, singles from the 40s and 50s. But I don't know. He captured something so unique. There's classic American songs on there, his own songs, and there's something about the rawness of his performance on this particular day that is just unmatched. In terms of live albums, it's probably one of the best live albums. Tame Impala, Innerspeaker. This album really was the beginning of my Tame Impala phase, because although I was aware of Tame Impala's music before, in like 2015 when Currents dropped, because of course you would hear The Less I Know the Better, and eventually songs like that at house parties and things of that nature. You know, these songs were famous enough to where I was familiar with Tame Impala, but not with his early catalog, which is a lot different in sound and style. And, you know, with Currents, he had dropped a poppier, glitzier, more 80s tinged production style, and this is so much more classic psych rock. It is such a great psych rock record. Perhaps, I think, the best of that generation of psych rock that sort of blossomed in the late 2000s and early 2010s, particularly out of Australia. It's just such a great, great album. I think the songwriting is so good. I do think some of the jams aren't maybe as eclectic or satisfying as they could be, considering that it's psych rock. Sometimes they're a little almost too simple in the sense that they're super linear. I mean, for psych rock, maybe it's not as experimental as it could be. Mostly I find that influence in the guitar tone and the drum tone. You know, otherwise his voice is sort of doing a John Lennon impression. But, I mean, I love Innerspeaker. I'm not saying anything bad about it. Alter Ego has to be one of my favorite songs of all time. If you listen to a single song off of it, listen to Alter Ego. Lonerism, 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 Lonerism. I love this album so much. It is by far my favorite Tame Impala album, and probably one of my favorite albums of all time. Apocalypse Dreams, Elephant, Keep On Lying. Keep On Lying is probably one of my favorite songs of all time. I mean, this album is just perfect. I wouldn't change anything about it. The texture of the drums, the fuzziness of the guitars. If Innerspeaker was psych rock, you know, when I was referring to it not being eclectic enough, to it not being complicated enough during the jams, this really scratches that itch. I mean, he got so loose with what he was trying to sound like. There's tracks like Elephant, which are sort of these harder, you know, more danceable even cuts, and then you've got super, you know, complex compositions like Keep On Lying, which eventually devolves into this delightful sort of ambiance of party where you hear people chattering and laughing in and out, and it just makes you feel like you're inside of a party and he's just playing in the background. And usually I don't like that kind of stuff unless it's in a live recording, so that, you know, it's sort of like if an artist were to put like a crowd cheering, oh, and the stadium goes wild in the back of their songs. I think that's a little corny. But particularly with Keep On Lying, I think it makes for one of the best songs of all time. I mean, I adore this album. I cannot say enough good things about it. Lonerism is by far one of the albums that I played the most on vinyl. I mean, I am constantly spinning all four sides of this. It is just phenomenal. I cannot say enough good things about it. And after Innerspeaker, I sort of go through artist discographies in order, and I mean, Innerspeaker is good, guys, but Lonerism is godly. Currents by Tame Impala, continuing the phase. This was an album that I think maybe should have chronologically appeared around 2015 in my high school era, because that's when I, you know, listened to The Less I Know the Better and so on. But I knew those as pop songs on the radio. I didn't know them as songs within an album and songs that sort of I would listen to outside of that. Because while they might have been on my playlist, you know, I didn't listen to them with the intensity that I did after I discovered or rediscovered Currents with the context of Innerspeaker and Lonerism that one fall of 2019. So anyway, I revisited Currents and of course appreciated it in a whole new light. I mean, he has such a fantastic way of making songs that sort of like Kids See Ghosts, particularly on Currents, feel totally contemporary and, you know, even looking towards the future, but it's using a lot of production styles or maybe references from older things, like pop from the 80s. There's moments on here where his falsetto and the synths are very, very glitzy and glammy. And I just think that, you know, it's not my favorite because I appreciate his psych rock era so much. I wish we would have gotten another album out of that style before he switched over to this. And honestly, I think he's only going to get poppier and poppier and more danceable as time goes on. I mean, this is already quite danceable, but just thinking about the direction that he's headed in with what he's worked on with Justice recently, I think that we're never going to hear anything like Tame Impala pre-Currents. And so for me, Currents is this bittersweet moment where it's a fantastic record, and I like what he's doing, and it was super forward-thinking. I mean, this changed the way that, like, hip-hop is produced, in the sense that Travis Scott and a lot of other rappers have cited him as influences and had him producing on songs. So I just think that, you know, it really broke him into the mainstream, and it is such an important record. But it's not my favorite of his. I mean, he had such a great run. Again, Innerspeaker, Lonerism, Currents. Slow Rush is not a bad album either, but that 3-album run has to be one of the best of the 2010s, if not the best. Just in the way that it was so simultaneously popular and inventive. I mean, I think, you know, despite the fact that he's always referencing older material, it never feels like he's straight up copying it. It's a kind of a wonderful pastiche or collage of different moments that sound like the standard of what another genre is. So like some songs I don't think could have been made back in the 80s, but the tone of the synths is definitely there. Like, you know, Past Life, when it sort of breaks into an abrasive, noisy, bass-boosted section, that definitely feels contemporary. But then some of the other songs are totally ballads that you know, kids would have been embarrassed to hold hands in like a middle school dance and go along to them with how sweet and saccharine they are. Cocteau Twins, Heaven or Las Vegas. Fall 2019, I really rediscover this album, and rediscover in the sense that I had listened to this as a child a ton, and I'd just forgotten about it. And so when I came back and revisited it, there were so many moments that I already was familiar with, but it was so strange. I was like rediscovering memories that I thought that I had lost, because my parents played Cocteau Twins a ton for me. So, you know, I didn't appreciate Elizabeth Fraser's voice back then, but it's so haunting and ethereal. To have that associated with childhood is, I don't know, such a gift for me. These songs kind of are unreal. They're pop, but they're proto-Bjork and proto-shoegaze, and so many things owe their style and aura to this record. I think this is their poppiest, but maybe their best to introduce people. Although my favorite has to be the one with the beige cover. I'm forgetting the name right now. Victorialand. Victorialand. I love Victorialand because it's a little less structured than this. I really appreciate what they were doing here. I mean, this is probably one of my favorite albums of all time as well. If I had to put maybe in the top 100 list, this would go in the top 50. But I don't know. There's something about the drums and the length of the songs that maybe is just a touch too 80s. It's a little dated. I don't think, you know, it's dated in the sense that this is music you can't listen to anymore, but I think for my personal taste, I think Victorialand, in its slightly more unstructured and less focused on drums, it sort of even maintains itself more contemporaneously, and I think should be more popular than Heaven or Las Vegas. Victorialand is my favorite Cocteau Twins album, and that one I would put probably in the top 10. But Cocteau Twins make music like no one else. I don't even know how you begin to discover that you can sing like this. It's kind of the same feeling that I get when I, you know, hear Bjork. It's that, you know, ethereal and beautiful and paranormal vibe. Tame Impala, The Slow Rush. Last, but certainly not least. I take that back. It is least. It is my least favorite Tame Impala album. If I had to order them, it would probably be Poster, Lonerism, Innerspeaker, Currents, Slow Rush. And I think there's just something about it that feels a tinge unfinished. Not that the album isn't polished, it is, and it sounds good, but there's something fundamentally unsatisfying about the drums on some of these songs. Like, the drumming isn't as punchy, as loud, as rich as it is on his earlier stuff, which is so good. I mean, the drums on Lonerism and Innerspeaker, I think, are stars of the show, absolutely. I think those albums are 100% about the drums and the guitar tones. But this has, like, not enough body. The drums are almost, like, without gut, without punch, and you just wish they would hit a little bit harder. You know, in part, I think it's because he was aiming for something poppier, but even with songs that, like, hark back to his psychedelic style, like One More Hour, I'm like, why aren't you going harder? This needed maybe, like, another mix or another pass. Okay, this is weird, actually. I totally forgot. This is also green. It's not translucent, but the fact that we've had 4 green records in this volume of my record collection is interesting. A lot of green pressings out there, and I didn't even realize it. you know, I don't know. I don't want to complain because this is a good album. I would recommend anyone listen to it. But is it as good as his early stuff? No. And do I like the direction that it bodes for him? Also no. So, I don't know what to say. I mean, go listen to it. Don't not listen to it. It reminds me of the pandemic, quite honestly. Songs like On Track and Borderline. I mean, this album came out in like February 2020, and by March we were all locked up, so I feel like there's something about it that's a little bit bittersweet also in that sense. It really reminds me of that era, and in a good way and a bad way at the same time. Thank you so much for watching part 4 of my record collection, wherein I go 15 records at a time in autobiographical order. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, thank you for liking and subscribing, and stay in touch for the last part coming up next. A lot of rediscovery in this episode, a lot of adult memories. A lot of these albums I feel like consistently were things that I had listened to in childhood but not understood as an adult, whereas a lot of the earlier stuff was stuff that I listened to as a child and then listened throughout my life. Whereas this I had, in some cases, forgotten about, or my parents had forgotten about. They didn't play it as much as I did when I was a kid, and I really formed the memories that I did with these albums as an adult, which is why they're placed here. And I think this would just about come to 2020 with the last album, Slow Rush, which is kind of when I stopped collecting records because I had bigger fish to fry. Money to spend on other things. And honestly, since I was in college, I didn't have a record player. So records without a record player became a lot less interesting to me. And anyway, I'm going to stop yapping. Thank you so much, and keep in touch. Bonus, if I want to start my record, I actually usually have to give it a little push for it to start. There it is. Alright, come on, baby. There we go. And then it keeps going afterward by itself, but yeah. Anyway, funny